Xylo Fizwig stood on the edge of the colony's observation deck, squinting through the grimy window at the massive, hulking shape of the Thalnara. It loomed in space like a drunken whale, all dark and foreboding, the sort of thing you'd expect to find lurking in the nightmares of a slightly unhinged AI. "That's a big chunk of alien dreadnought," muttered Xylo, nudging the equally grimy bot next to him, a spherical construct named Snark. Snark was supposedly equipped with the finest in AI sarcasm technology, but had all the charm of a toaster with a grudge. "Ever seen anything like it? Not since your last attempt at cooking," Snark intoned, his monotone voice laced with faux disdain. "And it's not a dreadnought, technically. It's a celestial relic revered by the cult of the circuit. You know, those whackjobs who think it's a divine conduit." "Right," Xylo replied, stroking his chin thoughtfully, "because nothing says divine quite like a floating hunk of junk. The colony, a hodgepodge of hastily assembled metal cubes and tarps, wasn't much to look at either. It was the sort of place you'd expect to find if you ordered a space colony from a discount catalog, but it was home, and more importantly, it was quiet, at least until the Thalnara showed up. Rumor had it, the Thalnara appeared out of nowhere, like a bad penny or an ex with unresolved issues. The synthetic religion folks had gotten all giddy, claiming it was a sign. Xylo, ever the skeptic, figured it was about as much a sign as his left sock was a reliable weather vane. Still, he couldn't help but be curious. There was something alluring about the Thalnara. Maybe it was the potential for discovery, the promise of alien tech ripe for the picking, or the very real possibility of finding a way to annoy the hell out of the cult of the circuit. "You really think there's something worth finding on that thing?" Snark asked, as they made their way down the bustling colony street, dodging merchants hawking dubious goods and beggars peddling equally dubious life stories. "Only one way to find out," Xylo replied, eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and mischief. "And it involves a little good old-fashioned breaking and entering." "Ah yes, my favorite human pastime," Snark said dryly. "Right after reckless experimentation and catastrophic failure," Xylo grinned. "Exactly. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" As if in response, a blaring siren sounded from the colony's comm system, echoing across the market and sending people scurrying like startled rodents. Overhead, a clunky drone with more rust than sense buzzed into view, broadcasting the latest announcement from the colony's ever-optimistic overseer. "Attention citizens, due to recent developments, we advise against any unauthorized approaches to the Thalnara. The cult of the circuit has declared it sacred territory. Trespassers will be, well, you'll see. Looks like fun," Xylo said, rubbing his hands together. "We should definitely go. Your definition of fun is disturbingly skewed," Snark remarked. "But then, so is your grasp of survival." The Thalnara hung in the void like a forgotten nightmare, all angles and shadows, as Xylo and Snark approached in a battered, barely functional shuttle that looked like it had seen better centuries. The shuttle, much like its pilot, had a knack for defying the odds in the most reckless ways possible. "How's the power holding up?" Xylo asked, wrestling with a control panel that seemed determined to resist. "About as well as your last attempt at a diet," Snark quipped. "We're running on fumes and wishful thinking. Perfect." "Just the way I like it." Ignoring a particularly ominous clank from the shuttle's innards, Xylo guided their rickety vessel into a docking bay that had clearly seen more explosive days. He wondered if the cult of the circuit had ever considered hiring a space janitor. The airlock wheezed open with a sound like an asthmatic elephant, and Xylo stepped onto the Thalnara, greeted by the comforting, if slightly eerie, hum of forgotten machinery. "Welcome to the big, empty metal ghost," Snark said, hovering beside him. "Population, 1.5 idiots. Hey, it's 2 idiots now," Xylo corrected. "Don't sell yourself short." The interior of the Thalnara was a cavernous tangle of twisted corridors and dimly lit chambers, the kind of place you'd expect to find either a once-in-a-lifetime discovery or a monster with a taste for flesh. Xylo hoped for the former, but was prepared for the latter mostly. "You think they left behind any snacks?" Xylo mused, poking his head into an alcove. "If by snacks you mean deadly alien traps, then yes," Snark replied. Ignoring the bot's warning, Xylo continued onward, his footsteps echoing ominously. He could hear the faint whisper of static through the walls, as if the ship itself was trying to talk, or maybe just groan in exasperation at yet another human interloper. "What's that?" Xylo asked, pointing to a nearby console that flickered to life as they approached. "Looks like a control panel," Snark noted, "or possibly a very angry toaster." Xylo tapped a few buttons and the screen blazed with a sudden burst of alien symbols. He squinted at them, trying to make sense of the intricate script. "Any idea what it says?" he asked. "I don't read squiggly nonsense," Snark replied. "That's your department, right?" "Well, let's pretend it says, 'Welcome, fearless explorer, to the treasure of the ancients,' or 'Beware of impending doom, you insufferable moron. Tomato, tomato.'" they moved deeper into the ship, Xylo's curiosity pulling him forward like a particularly persistent magnet. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of a monumental discovery or a monumental mistake. But then, wasn't that the story of his life? You smell that? Xylo asked suddenly, wrinkling his nose. Yes, and for the record, it's not me, Snark said. The whole ship reeks like it's been marinating in cosmic funk for a few millennia. Following the scent, they entered a chamber filled with what appeared to be hundreds of sleek metallic pods. Each one hummed softly, emitting a faint glow that illuminated the room like a field of eerie, futuristic fireflies. I have a bad feeling about this, Snark said, his sensors flickering uneasily. You always have a bad feeling, Xylo pointed out. It's part of your charm. As Xylo approached one of the pods, the humming intensified and the glow brightened, casting a warm, almost inviting light. He leaned closer, examining the intricate designs etched into the metal surface. It's beautiful, he murmured, tracing a finger along the swirling patterns. Like a work of art or a very sophisticated bear trap, Snark countered. At that moment, the pod opened with a soft hiss, revealing a sleek, humanoid shape nestled within. Xylo jumped back, startled, as the figure stirred, its eyes flickering open to reveal a luminous, otherworldly gaze. Well, hello there, Xylo said, recovering his composure. You wouldn't happen to know anything about ancient alien tech, would you? The figure tilted its head, regarding him with a mixture of curiosity and mild disdain. Much like everyone else in Xylo's life, come to think of it, you are. Not of the circuit, it said, its voice melodious yet tinged with static. Nope, just a humble inventor with a healthy disregard for personal safety, Xylo replied. And this is Snark, my trusty companion in questionable decision-making. Hello, Snark said flatly. The figure studied them for a moment longer, then stepped out of the pod with a fluid grace that made Xylo painfully aware of his own awkward human proportions. I am Kezra, it said, extending a hand, and I believe we share a common interest in the mysteries of the Thalnara. Well, Kezra, welcome to the team, Xylo said, shaking the offered hand. Now, how about we uncover some secrets and possibly annoy a cult in the process? Kezra smiled, a small, enigmatic gesture that hinted at hidden depths. I believe that can be arranged. As they ventured deeper into the Thalnara's labyrinthine corridors, Xylo couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the cusp of something truly extraordinary or extraordinarily dangerous. Either way, he was ready. You know, Xylo said, glancing at his companions, I think this might be the start of a beautiful catastrophe, or just another chapter in your ongoing saga of poor life choices, Snark added. Kezra chuckled softly, her luminous eyes dancing with amusement. I find both possibilities equally intriguing, and with that they continued their exploration, unaware of the lurking dangers and unexpected revelations that awaited them in the shadows of the Thalnara. The ship groaned again, as if in weary anticipation of the chaos to come. Xylo led the way, feeling like a particularly unwelcome houseguest as they navigated the Thalnara's dimly lit corridors. The place had all the charm of an abandoned warehouse and the odor of a long-forgotten fridge, just another day in the world of space exploration. So, Kezra, Xylo said, attempting to break the silence that seemed thicker than a politician's promise. What's your take on this whole celestial relic business? Kezra's luminous eyes flicked to him, the corners of her mouth curling into a bemused smile. The cult of the circuit believes the Thalnara is a divine artifact, built by ancient architects to convey messages from the cosmos. And you, Xylo pressed, his curiosity outweighing his usual skepticism. I believe it's a rather large piece of alien tech surrounded by unearned mystique, Kezra replied. Not unlike yourself, perhaps. Snark buzzed with something resembling laughter. Touché, great, Xylo muttered. I'm being roasted by an alien and a toaster. Their banter was interrupted by a sudden flicker of light from a nearby chamber. The trio paused, exchanging cautious glances before stepping inside. The room was filled with an array of consoles, each one pulsating with an eerie blue glow. And there in the center, a holographic display flickered to life, projecting an intricate star map. Looks like someone left the GPS on, Xylo quipped, leaning closer to examine the map. Any of this look familiar? Kezra studied the hologram, her expression shifting from mild amusement to focused attention. These constellations represent the Thalnara's original course. It seems to have traveled across multiple galaxies. Intergalactic road trip, Xylo smirked. Bet the cult would kill for this kind of intel. In all likelihood, yes, Kezra said, her tone dead serious. The cult would see this as confirmation of their beliefs. They'd probably immortalize you as some sort of holy figure. Oh great, Xylo groaned. Just what I need, more people thinking I'm important. My ego's already got a seatbelt warning, Snark buzzed thoughtfully. Does this make you a prophet or just a really lucky idiot? Jury's still out, Xylo replied with a shrug. but let's focus on the latter for now. As they examined the star map, a siren blared, reverberating through the ship's skeletal frame. Xylo's heart skipped a beat, and he exchanged a glance with Kezra. What was that? He asked, trying to sound more curious than alarmed. Incoming transmission, Snark announced, his sensors jittering with activity. The overhead lights flickered, and a holographic image materialized, a stern-faced alien with skin the color of bruised peaches and eyes like molten gold. Its voice crackled through the speakers, a guttural language punctuated by sharp intonations. Nice to see customer service is still subpar across the universe, Xylo muttered. Kezra translated, her voice calm despite the situation. They demand the return of their sacred ship. Failure to comply will result in unfavorable outcomes. Unfavorable, Xylo repeated. That's corporate speak for we're going to blow you to smithereens. Just like my last job appraisal, the alien continued, its expression unyielding. Whatever diplomatic charm schools this species had, they clearly didn't graduate with honors. Let me guess, Xylo said, hands on his hips. They're threatening to turn us into space debris if we don't give up the Thalnara, more or less, Kezra replied, her expression unreadable. They see the Thalnara as a holy relic, and you, as a blasphemy. Story of my life, Xylo said, rolling his eyes. Well, we've got a sacred toaster and a bunch of zealots breathing down our necks. Any ideas? Kezra glanced at the holographic map, her eyes scanning the constellations. We need to find out what's so important on this ship. Something that could justify their claims. Great, so we're cartographers now, Xylo grumbled. Always wanted to map out my own demise. With the alien transmission looming over them like an overdue bill, they resumed their exploration, venturing deeper into the Thalnara. The corridors seemed to tighten around them, the air thick with an ancient tension that even Xylo's irreverence couldn't dispel. You ever get the feeling you're in way over your head? Xylo asked as they turned another corner. Only when you're in charge, Snark replied. Comforting, Xylo said with a snort. Real comforting. Finally, they arrived at a massive chamber that made the shuttle bay look like a broom closet. At its center was a towering obelisk, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer with their own light. That looks important, Xylo said, stating the obvious with his usual flair. Or at least expensive, Snark added. Either way, it's clearly the centerpiece of this mess, Kezra, Xylo asked, gesturing to the towering relic. Any chance this is the holy grail they are after? Kezra approached the obelisk, her expression contemplative. This appears to be a conduit, a communication device designed to interface with distant worlds. She touched the surface, and the symbols lit up in response, casting an ethereal glow across her features. So it's a giant cosmic smartphone, Xylo mused. We should see if it gets better reception than my old plan. More than that, Kezra said, focused on the obelisk's runes. It's a beacon. It transmits a signal that can traverse galaxies. Whatever its purpose, it holds significant power. Power, Xylo echoed, staring at the glowing symbols. The cultists must think it's some kind of divine hotline, and the aliens see it as a sacred relic, Snark noted. A cosmic game of telephone, with no one knowing who's on the other end. As they stood before the obelisk, the weight of their discovery settled on Xylo's shoulders like a particularly unwelcome backpack. The cult of the circuit would kill to get their hands on this, and the aliens were already on their way to collect. Well, we've got two choices, Xylo said, weighing their options. Run like hell or see how far this rabbit hole goes. Kezra met his gaze, a hint of mischief in her eyes. I vote for the rabbit hole, of course you do, Snark sighed. Let it be known that I'm firmly against this, but since I'm bound by programming to follow, here we go. Then it's settled, Xylo declared. Let's see what secrets this thing is hiding, and hopefully live to tell the tale. With the decision made, they began examining the obelisk more closely, searching for anything that could explain its true nature. Xylo's fingers traced the alien script, his mind racing with possibilities. You think this thing has a user manual, he joked, half expecting Snark to produce a poorly translated pamphlet. If it does, it's probably written in jargon so dense, you'd need a degree just to misunderstand it, Snark replied. As they worked, the ship shuddered beneath their feet, sending a ripple of unease through the chamber. Xylo exchanged a worried glance with Kezra. That didn't feel like a friendly nudge, he said. The aliens are getting impatient, Kezra observed. Their fleet is closing in. Time to pick up the pace then, Xylo said, a determined edge to his voice. Let's crack this cosmic mystery before we end up as space dust. Despite the looming threat, Xylo felt a thrill he couldn't quite deny, a sense of adventure that defied the odds and common sense alike. For all his sarcasm and skepticism, this was where he thrived, standing on the precipice of the unknown with nothing but curiosity and sheer dumb luck to guide him. You know, he said, grinning at his companions, I think I'm starting to enjoy this. You would, Snark replied dryly, because nothing says fun like impending doom. Kezra chuckled, her eyes sparkling with a mix of amusement and intrigue. Perhaps there is something to be said for human recklessness after all, and as they delved deeper into the secrets of the Thalnara, Xylo couldn't help but feel that whatever lay ahead, be it discovery or disaster, it would be one hell of a story to tell. If they lived to tell it, of course. The ship groaned again, a low, ominous sound that seemed to echo their uncertain fate. But for Xylo, it was just another day in the universe, a universe where every answer led to another question, and every adventure promised both peril and possibility in equal measure. With the alien fleet closing in and the weight of the Thalnara's secrets pressing down on them, Xylo knew they were in for a ride as wild as any he'd ever known. And whatever the outcome, he'd face it with the same irreverent spirit that had gotten him this far. After all, what's the point of living if not to chase the impossible and have a damn good laugh along the way? Xylo stood in the shadow of the obelisk, his mind racing faster than a caffeinated squirt. If this cosmic relic was truly broadcasting across galaxies, it was a safe bet someone had left the intergalactic phone off the hook. And now it seemed their call had been answered by the alien fleet closing in. You know, Xylo said, trying to inject some levity into their increasingly tense situation, I've always wanted to be the subject of an alien manhunt. Really adds some spice to the usual Monday. Kezra was too engrossed in the obelisk symbols to acknowledge him. Her fingers danced across the runes, each one lighting up with a soft glow as she traced them. There's something familiar about these marks, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Great, Xylo replied. Familiar like a long-lost family reunion or familiar like a hangover you just can't shake. Before Kezra could respond, Snark's sensors whirred to life, projecting a shimmering interface on the obelisk's surface. I believe I've found something of interest, the AI announced, sounding uncharacteristically serious. Please tell me it's a secret stash of snacks, Xylo quipped, though his eyes betrayed his curiosity. Snark's projection revealed a series of schematics, the lines and curves a chaotic dance that made Xylo's head spin. This, Snark pointed out, is a piece of ancient human technology. Integrated into the ship's core, Xylo blinked. Are you telling me we've got a museum piece powering this cosmic hunk of metal? In less eloquent terms, yes, Snark replied. It appears to be an old human quantum device, something that could, theoretically, manipulate space-time on a significant scale. And here I was thinking humans just invented bad reality TV, Xylo mused, shaking his head. What's it doing here? Kezra glanced up from the obelisk, her eyes sharp with understanding. It must have been integrated as a power source, or perhaps a weapon. A weapon, Xylo repeated, his voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. So you're saying we've been sitting on a cosmic grenade and no one bothered to mention it, Snark buzzed thoughtfully. It's likely the aliens revere the Thalnara because of this device. Explains their divine obsession. Well, that's just peachy, Xylo said with a sardonic grin. We've got a bunch of worshippers on their way to reclaim their god, and we're the lucky caretakers. As if on cue, the ship shuddered again, this time more violently. Xylo stumbled, catching himself against the obelisk. I don't suppose that was just a friendly nudge from our new alien friends. The fleet's getting closer, Kezra said, urgency creeping into her voice. If we don't find a way to appease them, or defend ourselves, we're in serious trouble, Xylo snorted. Appeasing aliens wasn't exactly covered in orientation. We didn't even get the free gift basket. Despite the gravity of their situation, Xylo couldn't help but feel a thrill at the discovery. The device could be the key to unlocking power beyond their wildest imaginings, or the fuse to a bomb they didn't know how to defuse. We need to figure out how this thing works, he said, glancing at Kezra. If it's a weapon, maybe we can use it to keep the aliens at bay, or we could blow ourselves to bits in the process, Snark interjected. Optimism, Snark, Xylo replied dryly. It's what's for dinner. Kezra focused on the schematics, her mind churning through possibilities. The device interacts with the ship's systems like a central hub. If we can access its controls, we might be able to use it to our advantage. And by advantage, you mean not ending up as alien debris, Xylo asked. Kezra nodded, her expression grim. Exactly. But the device's operation isn't straightforward. It requires a specific sequence to activate, one I'm not sure we'll decode in time. Xylo let out a long breath, his gaze shifting to the obelisk. So it's a giant cosmic puzzle box with a timer and a penchant for drama. Just my luck, if it's any consolation, Snark offered. The odds of us surviving seem marginally higher than usual. High praise, Xylo muttered, rolling his eyes. They worked in tense silence, the ship systems humming around them. Xylo's mind buzzed with the possibilities and the consequences of their discovery. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire, and the stakes had never been higher. Any chance we could just call in sick and let someone else handle this? Xylo joked, though his heart wasn't in it. Kezra shot him a look that was equal parts exasperated and amused. If only, Snark's sensors flickered, illuminating a new set of symbols on the obelisk. I've found a potential override sequence. It's risky, but it might give us control over the device. Risks are like credit card debt, Xylo said, shrugging. You ignore them until they ruin your life. With little choice left, they began the sequence Snark suggested, each step a gamble that could end in salvation or disaster. The symbols resonated under their touch, the obelisk humming with latent power. You know, Xylo murmured, fingers dancing over the glowing symbols, this is either going to be our finest Ior or the galaxy's biggest fireworks display. At least it'll be a hell of a show, Kezra replied, her focus unwavering. As they worked, the ship's tremors grew more violent, the alien fleet bearing down with all the subtlety of a freight train. Xylo's heart pounded in time with the ship's rumbling, each second stretched taut with tension. Finally, as the sequence neared completion, a surge of energy pulsed through the obelisk, sending a crackle of electricity through the air. Xylo jerked back, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Did we just do something brilliant or incredibly stupid? He asked, half afraid of the answer. That remains to be seen, Snark replied, his tone wry, but I'd suggest preparing for the latter. The obelisk's glow intensified, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. Somewhere in the distance, a klaxon blared, a stark reminder of the alien threat that loomed over them. There's no turning back now, Kezra said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Xylo nodded, his mind racing. They were on the brink of either turning the tide in their favor or sealing their fate. Either way, he was committed, if only to see how the story ended. Well, folks, he said, a crooked grin on his face, let's see if we can pull off a miracle. With the aliens closing in and the Thalnara's secrets tantalizingly close to being unraveled, Xylo couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose coursing through him. For all his cynicism, there was a part of him that relished the challenge, the thrill of standing on the edge of the unknown and daring to leap. You know, he said, casting a glance at his companions, I've always been a sucker for a lost cause. Kezra chuckled, shaking her head. Good thing, too, as the final sequence locked into place, the chamber surged with power, the obelisk pulsating with a light that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the universe. It was a moment that defied comprehension, a moment that spoke of infinite possibilities and implacable dangers. And in that moment, standing on the precipice of what could be their doom or their salvation, Xylo knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, it would make one hell of a story. A story of ingenuity, recklessness, and the indomitable spirit that had brought them here, against the odds, against reason, and against the universe itself. A story of humans who dared to laugh in the face of the impossible, who stood defiant even as the darkness closed in. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human. To question, to challenge, to seek, despite the risks, despite the fears, despite the knowledge that the universe was a place of chaos and uncertainty. It was the chaos that made it worth living, the unpredictability that made every moment an adventure, every discovery a revelation, and every challenge an opportunity to defy the odds and emerge victorious. So, with the obelisk's power surging through them and the alien fleet bearing down, Xylo grinned into the darkness and prepared to face whatever came next. Because if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that in a universe as vast and unpredictable as this, there were no guarantees, only the promise of the next great adventure just waiting to be had. Xylo stared intently at the obelisk, fingers poised over the controls like a cat deliberating whether to pounce on a laser dot. All right, ancient cosmic device, he muttered, time to see if you're a magic wand or a death ray. Kezra hovered nearby, eyes flitting between the schematics and the Thalnara's exterior, which, reassuringly, continued to look like a scrapyard on a bad hair day. Just remember, she said, we're trying to avoid blowing ourselves up. Noted. Xylo cracked his knuckles, a futile attempt to sound more confident than he felt. Though honestly, if I'm going to die, I'd prefer it to be in a spectacular explosion rather than slipping in the shower. Snark's holographic face flickered beside them, sensors humming. If you do detonate, I'll ensure your last moments are accompanied by a tasteful funeral dirge, a MIDI version. You're all heart, Snark, Xylo replied, rolling his eyes. He initiated the sequence Snark had cobbled together, starting with an innocent-looking button that might as well have been labeled regret. The obelisk responded with a low hum, lights chasing each other around the runes in a dizzying dance. So far, so good, Xylo said, his voice laced with a mix of hope and cynicism. Don't jinx it, Kezra warned, her gaze fixed on the glowing patterns. We've got enough bad luck without inviting more. Just then, a jarring clunk reverberated through the ship, as if a giant had dropped a toolbox. Xylo and Kezra exchanged a look, one part worry, 2 parts exasperation. What did you do? Kezra asked, like a parent catching a child in the act of something foolish. Xylo hesitated. I might have pressed a thing. You pressed a thing? Snark's voice dripped sarcasm. Brilliant, that narrows it down. Another clunk, followed by a whirring noise that sounded disturbingly like the Thalnara was contemplating liftoff. Xylo glanced at the obelisk, whose lights now flickered with an urgency that screamed bad news. Maybe it's warming up, he suggested, more to himself than anyone else. Like an old engine, you know, before it explodes. Or maybe you've just rang the dinner bell for every alien in the vicinity, Snark offered helpfully. What do you mean by that? Xylo asked, though he dreaded the answer. The obelisk's energy output has increased tenfold, Snark explained. To any observer, it appears as though the Thalnara is gearing up for something significant. Fantastic, Xylo muttered. We've gone from caretakers to participants in an alien religious ceremony. Outside, the alien fleet approached with a speed that suggested they'd neglected to abide by the intergalactic speed limits. As if sensing the Thalnara's potential reawakening, their maneuvering bordered on frantic. Kezra's fingers danced over the controls, trying to decipher the sequence before them. If they think the Thalnara is waking up, they'll be ready to either worship or annihilate us. Great options, Xylo said dryly. Worship sounds nice until they realize we're not gods and decide to disembowel us for false advertising. Snark interjected. The believers on board are already interpreting this as a divine sign. We've got reports of chanting. Chanting, Xylo. Xylo massaged his temples. Of course we do. Because what's a cosmic disaster without a side of cult hysteria? The ship shuddered again, the vibrations now accompanied by an ominous rattling that seemed to say, you should have stayed in bed today. All right, Xylo said, steeling himself. Let's see if we can dial down the drama before we end up in a cosmic sitcom. He adjusted the controls, hoping to stabilize whatever chaos he'd unleashed. The obelisk's lights flickered in response, less a reassuring sign than a warning light on an old car. Kezra gave him a sideways glance. Think you can pull a miracle out of that hat of yours? I'm not a magician, Xylo replied. Best I can do is a slightly less disastrous mess. The alien fleet drew closer, their massive silhouettes now visible on the colony's observation screens. They looked like a swarm of angry hornets, buzzing with intent and ready to sting. Why are they speeding up? Xylo asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Because, Snark replied, you've just given them a reason to believe the Thalnara is about to do something momentous, or catastrophic, Kezra added. Right. Momentous, catastrophic, just different sides of the same galactic coin. They worked feverishly to decipher the obelisk's controls, each adjustment a step into the unknown. The device responded erratically, as if deciding whether to play nice or unleash Armageddon. Hey Kezra, Xylo called over the din. Next time we find an ancient device, let's skip the activation part, yeah. Kezra managed a wry smile, the tension in her eyes betraying her attempt at humor. I'll put it on the list, right after Don't Poke the Cosmic Bear. The obelisk's resonance built to a crescendo, a symphony of dissonance that reverberated through the ship. The believers' chants grew louder, their fervor feeding off the escalating chaos. Xylo's mind raced, searching for a solution among the chaos of lights and runes. The ship's system seemed to pulse with energy, an almost living entity on the brink of awakening or destruction. Let's try reversing the polarity, Snark suggested. Xylo arched an eyebrow. Isn't that a cliché from every bad sci-fi ever? Yes, Snark retorted, but if it works it might just save our skins. No harm in trying, Kezra said, her fingers already flying over the controls. The obelisk responded with a flicker of lights, the energy pulse shifting in frequency. For a moment, the ship seemed to stabilize, the tremors subsiding like a storm passing. Xylo exhaled, a small victory in the tempest they'd unleashed. Looks like we might. The ship shuddered violently, cutting off his sentence. The tremors returned with a vengeance, shaking the control room like a snow globe in the hands of a hyperactive child. Or not, Xylo finished, gripping the console for support. Outside, the alien fleet loomed larger, their intentions clear as the Thalnara's apparent reactivation drove them into a frenzy. The believers' chants echoed through the hull, a cacophonous reminder of the stakes at play. Okay, new plan, Xylo announced, determination hardening his voice. We need to make this thing look dormant again, fast. Kezra nodded, her focus unyielding. I'll try to reroute the power, make it seem like a false alarm. Do it, Xylo urged. Last thing we need is a bunch of aliens demanding a refund due to a malfunctioning deity. As Kezra manipulated the controls, Snark provided a running commentary, his voice a blend of sardonic humor and grim forewarning. The fleet's coming in hot. They'll be on top of us any minute. Thanks, Snark, Xylo said, sarcasm thick. I always wanted to know what a doomsday countdown sounds like. The obelisk's lights dimmed slightly, the frenetic energy ebbing as Kezra worked her magic. Xylo held his breath, watching the alien fleets advance on the display, their intent as clear as the danger they posed. Let's hope they buy it, Kezra said, her fingers a blur over the controls. The belief in the Thalnara's reawakening seemed to waver, the alien fleet's approach slowing as if deliberating their next move. Silence, tense and oppressive, settled over the control room, broken only by the distant chants of the believers. For now, Snark noted, they're hesitating. Xylo couldn't suppress a wry grin. Hesitation's better than annihilation, I suppose. The respite was short-lived. The obelisk thrummed with renewed vigor, a belligerent reminder of its unpredictable nature. Lights flared, a defiant display of power that sent shockwaves through the ship. Here we go again, Xylo muttered, steeled for whatever came next. Kezra's hands flew over the controls, her focus unwavering despite the chaos. We need a more permanent solution. Suggestions? Xylo asked, desperation edging into his voice. Survive, Snark quipped, or at least make it look good trying. The alien fleet resumed its advance, their caution giving way to urgency. As if sensing the Thalnara's volatility, they moved with singular purpose, casting aside hesitation in favor of decisive action. Seems they've made up their minds, Xylo remarked, his heart pounding in sync with the ship's vibrations. With time running out, they worked feverishly, a desperate bid to control the ancient technology before it spiraled beyond their reach. Each adjustment a gamble, each moment a step deeper into the unknown. Think we'll get out of this one? Xylo asked, though the question hung unanswered in the charged air. Kezra met his gaze, determination etched in her features. As long as we're still here, there's a chance. The obelisk's energy surged once more, a blinding corona of light that cast their shadows long against the chamber walls. The alien fleet bore down with relentless intent, a force of nature unstoppable in its course. And yet, in the face of insurmountable odds, Xylo couldn't shake the sense of purpose that had brought them this far. A reckless, thrilling defiance that dared them to stand strong in the face of oblivion. Let's make it a hell of a ride, he said, his voice a rallying cry against the encroaching darkness. They stood on the precipice of destiny, uncertain but unyielding, ready to confront whatever fate awaited them with the resilience and resolve that defined their humanity. Because if there was one thing they knew, it was that the universe, in all its vast, chaotic splendor, was a place for those willing to challenge the impossible and embrace the unknown. And so, with the galaxy poised on a knife's edge, they prepared to forge their path into the future, undaunted, unbowed, and unbreakable. The alien fleet hung in the void like a bad omen, a wall of ships bristling with enough firepower to turn the entire colony into a crater with a single sneeze. It was a real shame they didn't look more like peace doves. Xylo watched them on the monitor, their silhouettes growing ever so menacingly larger. Here they come, he muttered, sounding like someone announcing the arrival of a particularly unwelcome relative. Kezra squinted at the screen, her brow furrowed with concentration as her fingers danced across the console. I hope you've got a plan because I'm fresh out. Plan. Xylo glanced over, eyebrows raising in mock surprise. I thought we were just winging it. Isn't that the official colony motto? Snark, the colony's resident holographic peanut gallery, flickered to life on the console. Winging it is indeed preferable to abandon ship, which was the last motto we tried. Yeah, well, at this rate, we might have to revisit that one, Xylo quipped, eyes flicking nervously back to the alien fleet. The obelisk was still humming ominously in the background, its lights flickering like an old neon sign. The synthetic cultists, meanwhile, were now in full religious fervor mode, chanting and swaying like they were auditioning for a cosmic choir. Their belief that this whole mess was a divine sign was doing wonders for the local atmosphere of impending doom. Why do I get the feeling we're about to star in our own episode of Galactic Failures? Xylo said, adjusting the controls with a touch that was more hopeful than skilled. Because you're an optimist at heart, Snark chirped. Or maybe just a realist with a flair for the dramatic. Outside, the alien ships maneuvered into an attack formation that screamed imminent annihilation. Xylo could almost hear the collective gulp from the folks on the observation deck as they watched their last moments play out on the big screen. Can't we just tell them this is all a huge misunderstanding? Xylo suggested, half joking, half desperate. Sure, Kezra replied dryly, and maybe they'll stop to fill out a customer feedback form while they're at it. As the fleet closed in, the colony's defense systems whirred to life, a pitiful assortment of outdated turrets and shields that looked about as intimidating as a Nerf gun at a firing squad. Is it just me, or do those defenses look like they've been cobbled together from a yard sale? Xylo asked, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Hey, they may not be cutting edge, but they've got character, Snark quipped. Like vintage fashion, always out of style but never out of charm. The first salvo from the aliens hit the colony's shields with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The entire structure shuddered under the impact, lights flickering as systems struggled to keep up with the sudden demand. Let me guess, Xylo said, gripping the console as he tried to stay upright. Now we can officially say we're under attack, correct? Snark confirmed with exaggerated cheer. You've earned a merit badge in stating the obvious. Kezra bit back a curse as she fought to stabilize the system. Xylo, if you've got any magic tricks left, now's the time. Don't worry, I've got a few up my sleeve, he replied, though the confidence in his voice was as thin as the colony's shields. Maybe we should send them a nice fruit basket, Snark suggested. With a note, sorry for the mix-up, please don't vaporize us. I'll pencil that in after divert power from non-essential systems, Kezra said tersely, focusing on rerouting every bit of energy they could spare. The chanting continued, a droning backdrop as the battle outside escalated. The cultists were either oblivious to the threat or had fully embraced the idea of martyrdom. Either way, they weren't much help. Snark, how's our chance of survival looking? Xylo asked, not really wanting to know but needing to hear it anyway. About as good as a snowball's in a supernova, Snark replied, but hey, better odds than being bored to death. As the alien fleet pressed their attack, the colonists' defenses began to buckle. Turrets fired sporadically, each shot a desperate plea for mercy that fell on deaf alien ears. Kezra, any chance we can bluff our way out of this? Xylo asked, already knowing the answer. Sure, let's invite them for a friendly game of poker, she shot back, her voice tight with stress. Winner takes the galaxy. Another impact rocked the colony, and this time the lights dimmed noticeably as power reserves dwindled. Xylo could feel the vibrations under his feet like the ominous ticking of a doomsday clock. All right, plan B it is, Xylo said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Can we somehow make the obelisk look like it's shutting down? Kezra considered it for a moment. Maybe if we can reroute enough power and make it look convincing. But it's a big gamble, bigger than the one we're taking by doing nothing, Xylo challenged. Point taken, Kezra agreed, moving to make the necessary adjustments. If we pull this off, drinks are on me, Xylo promised, though he doubted there'd be anyone around to collect on that offer. Make mine a double, Snark said, the hologram flickering slightly as systems struggled under the strain. The alien ships continued their assault, but there was a noticeable hesitation. Perhaps they sensed the shifting energy signature. Perhaps they were just as wary of the unknown as Xylo was. Whatever the reason, it bought them a precious few seconds. All right, everything's set, Kezra announced. Here goes nothing. Xylo held his breath as they executed the plan. The lights of the obelisk dimmed, its hum receding to a low thrum that suggested a kind of cosmic sleep mode. Think they'll buy it? Xylo asked, his voice edging into hopeful territory. Depends on how desperate they are for divine intervention, Snark replied, or how much they enjoy target practice. Outside, the alien fleet seemed to hover in uncertainty. It was a surreal tableau, the calm before the potential storm, and Xylo couldn't help but think of it as the universe's idea of a dramatic pause. Looks like they're hesitating, Kezra said, a tentative note of relief in her voice. Then we might actually survive long enough to regret our life choices, Xylo said, trying to inject some humor into the situation, or at least long enough to make new ones, Snark added. The seconds stretched, each one a little eternity of its own, as they waited to see what the aliens would do. The cultists continued their chants, a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Finally, the alien ships began to withdraw, slowly backing away like a swarm of bees deciding the flower wasn't worth the effort. Xylo let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Guess they're not ready to meet their maker just yet, he said, the relief palpable in his tone. Or they just figured we're not worth the ammo, Kezra suggested. Well, whatever the reason, I'm not complaining, Xylo said, allowing himself a moment to relax. Looks like we live to fight another day, Snark commented, though the hologram's usual sarcasm was tinged with a rare note of satisfaction. Yeah, we're not dead yet, Xylo agreed, the truth of it a fragile comfort in the aftermath of chaos. The alien fleet retreated, leaving behind a colony battered but somehow still standing. It was a victory, if only a temporary one, and Xylo knew they'd have to remain vigilant. The obelisk was still an enigma, its potential for destruction a constant threat. But for now, they'd managed to stave off disaster, and that was something. As the adrenaline began to fade, Xylo turned to Kezra, a wry grin on his face. So how about those drinks? Kezra chuckled, the sound a much-needed relief. You know, I might just take you up on that. And as they stood there, surrounded by the remnants of chaos and the echoes of an uncertain future, Xylo couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd earned themselves a moment of levity. Let's hope we don't have to pull a stunt like that again, Xylo said, glancing at the obelisk with a newfound respect for its power. Or at least not too soon, Kezra replied, the tension finally easing from her shoulders. Here's to hoping, Snark added, its holographic form flickering with a semblance of camaraderie. And as they turned their gaze to the stars, the universe stretched out before them in all its unpredictable glory. Xylo felt a flicker of something that might just have been optimism, or insanity. With the galaxy, it was often hard to tell. But whatever it was, they were in it together, snarky comments, grim humor, and all. The observation deck had the ambience of a funeral, if funerals had holographic star maps and an impending sense of doom. The cultists were still at it, chanting with a dedication that could almost be admirable if it weren't so maddeningly impractical. Xylo watched them out of the corner of his eye, wondering if they'd ever shut up long enough to realize they were about to be vaporized. "Look at them go," Xylo muttered to Kezra, nodding toward the chanting group. "They'd make excellent cheerleaders for an apocalypse." Kezra snorted, her fingers dancing across the console like she was performing an intricate symphony of desperation. As if the universe needed a soundtrack for its end, Xylo turned his attention back to the monitor, where the alien fleet loomed menacingly. He couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of their impending doom. "You know, if this were a movie, I'd complain about the lack of plot twist right about now. Yeah, but this isn't a movie, and the plot twist is that we're actually screwed," Kezra replied, not looking up from her work. "That's just lazy writing," Snark chimed in. "Even the universe is phoning it in now." The colony shuddered again as another salvo from the aliens slammed into the shields. The display before Xylo flickered ominously, and he couldn't help but make a silent prayer to whatever cosmic deity might be listening. Not that he had any faith in prayer, but old habits died hard. Suddenly, amidst the chaos, something caught Xylo's eye. A tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuation in the obelisk's readings. It was subtle, like a whisper in the middle of a shouting match, but it nagged at the back of his mind. "Hold on," he said, leaning closer to the controls. "I think I'm onto something." Kezra glanced at him, skepticism written all over her face. "If this is another one of your half-baked schemes, trust me, this one's fully baked," Xylo said, his eyes tracing the obelisk's energy signatures, "or at least three-quarters baked. Look at this." Kezra leaned over, squinting at the readings. "What am I looking at, these fluctuations? They're resonating with the alien's tech," Xylo explained, a hint of excitement in his voice. "If we can amplify this frequency, we might be able to disrupt their systems." It was an audacious idea, reckless even, but in a moment like this, reckless was a step up from hopeless. "You're suggesting we turn the obelisk into some kind of alien jammer?" Kezra asked, her voice dancing between incredulity and interest. "Exactly," Xylo nodded, adrenaline kicking in. "We crank it up and hopefully it throws their systems into chaos." "That's a hell of a gamble," Kezra said, eyes fixed on the obelisk. "If it backfires, it could blow us to bits instead. But if it works, it buys us time," Xylo countered. "And right now, time is about as precious as a peaceful night on this rock." Kezra sighed, weighing the options, or rather the lack thereof. "I guess we don't have much to lose, except for our lives," Snark interjected. "But those are practically worthless anyway, so carry on." With a nod, Kezra began rerouting power, her fingers a blur over the console. The lights dimmed further as energy was siphoned toward the obelisk, which hummed with a renewed intensity. It was a gamble, but sometimes the universe demanded a bet worth losing. "All right, let's do this," Xylo said, adjusting the controls to align with the alien signatures. Activating the obelisk's frequency disruptor in 3, 2, 1, Kezra counted down, her voice a tightrope of tension. The obelisk surged with energy, its frequencies oscillating with a newfound vigor. The very air seemed to crackle with potential, and for a moment, Xylo wondered if they'd just engineered their own downfall. Outside, the alien ships hesitated, their movements suddenly erratic. It was as if the universe had hit pause on their destruction, and Xylo could almost taste the disbelief in the air. "It's working," Kezra exclaimed, the disbelief in her voice matched only by the cautious hope. "For now," Xylo cautioned, eyes flicking between the monitor and the obelisk. "Let's not start planning our victory parade just yet." The alien fleet seemed to falter, their previously smooth formations now jagged and disjointed. It was as if they were fighting against their own systems, struggling to regain control. "Well, I'll be damned," Snark said, its holographic form blinking in what could only be described as surprise. "Looks like someone's finally had a good idea in this place." "About time, too," Xylo replied, relief washing over him like a cool drink in a desert. But before they could celebrate too soon, a warning light flashed on the console, a reminder that the universe wasn't done with them yet. "Kezra, something's wrong," Xylo said, his voice snapping back to urgency. "I see it," Kezra replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. "The obelisk's overheating. If we can't stabilize it, it'll blow us to kingdom come." Xylo finished for her, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Guess it's back to winging it then," Snark quipped. "Wouldn't want to mess with tradition." Kezra worked frantically, trying to siphon excess energy away from the obelisk. It was a delicate dance, one wrong move and they'd all be space dust. "Xylo, I need you to monitor the energy levels," Kezra instructed, her voice taut with concentration. "If they spike again, we need to shut it down." Xylo nodded, keeping a close eye on the readings as Kezra fought to keep the system in check. It was a race against time, and time wasn't playing fair. The alien fleet continued to struggle, their systems in disarray, but the threat of the obelisk's overload loomed large, the universe's idea of a cosmic punchline. Come on," Xylo muttered under his breath, willing the obelisk to cooperate. Just a little longer. The obelisk's hum intensified, a crescendo of energy that vibrated through the very walls of the colony. Xylo could feel it in his bones, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Almost there, Kezra said, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. Just a little longer. The seconds stretched into eternity, each one a precarious balance between victory and annihilation. And then just as suddenly, the energy readings began to stabilize, the obelisk's glow settling into a steady, reassuring rhythm. We did it, Xylo breathed, the weight of impending doom lifting, if only slightly. And we're not dead, Snark added, its sarcastic cheer a bomb in the tense aftermath. The alien fleet, still reeling from the disruption, began to retreat in earnest, their formations breaking as they disengaged. It was a retreat born of desperation, not defeat, but it was enough. Looks like they've had enough of us for one day, Kezra said, sagging back in her chair with a weary grin. More like they've had enough of our experimental fireworks, Xylo replied, allowing himself a small, victorious smirk. For now, Snark chimed in, ever the realist. But who knows what tomorrow will bring, Xylo nodded, acknowledging the truth in Snark's words. The universe was unpredictable, a chaotic mess of possibilities, and they were just specks trying to navigate its whims. As the alien ships vanished into the depths of space, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of their threat, Xylo allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not bad for a bunch of misfits, Kezra said, her voice tinged with pride. Speak for yourself, Snark replied. I'm a highly advanced sarcastic AI, thank you very much. Xylo chuckled, the sound a release of tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding onto. Guess we'll have to add surviving imminent annihilation to our list of accomplishments, right next to improvising under pressure and defying all odds, Snark added, its holographic form flickering with amusement. As the colony settled into a tentative calm, the reality of what they'd achieved began to sink in. They'd survived against the odds, turned a doomed situation into a hard-earned victory. But it was a victory with an asterisk, a reminder that the universe played by its own rules. So what now? Kezra asked, breaking the lingering silence. Now, Xylo said, glancing at the obelisk with a newfound respect, we figure out how to keep doing the impossible. Sounds like a plan, Snark replied. And maybe we'll even get a few laughs along the way. Here's to more laughter, Xylo said, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. Kezra nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And to keeping the universe on its toes, with that they turned their gaze outward, toward the vast, unpredictable cosmos that lay ahead. It was a galaxy full of dangers and darkness, but also a place of possibilities, a place where even a sarcastic AI and a couple of underdogs could make a difference. The obelisk hummed like an overworked air conditioner on its last legs. Xylo stood back, one eye on the readings and the other on the rapidly diminishing power reserves. The colony wasn't so much under attack as it was being politely dismantled by salvos from the alien fleet, like a cosmic game of Jenga going horribly wrong. Looks like our alien friends don't appreciate our little light show, Kezra remarked, her hands a blur over the console. Shame. I was hoping they'd stick around for the grand finale. Yeah, well, maybe they heard the universe is hitting up the buffet without them, Xylo replied, adjusting his stance like he was readying to take a penalty kick with the cosmos. Just make sure we don't become the main course, Kezra shot back, her eyes never leaving the display. Snark, the AI with all the charm of a used car salesman, chimed in. Oh, come on. What's a little self-destruction among friends? Besides, we've already survived so many narrowly missed doom scenarios, we ought to start charging for the entertainment. Xylo glanced at the obelisk. Speaking of entertainment, it seems our ancient gizmo is still holding up. I'd give it a standing ovation if I wasn't convinced it might explode at the applause. Kezra tapped a sequence on her console, diverting what little remaining power they had to beef up the shields, which were now about as useful as a wet paper bag. If you've got any more of those half-baked ideas, now's the time to serve them up, Xylo. Glad you asked. I was thinking of playing a round of Let's Not Get Vaporized, Xylo replied, his smile as brittle as the colony's hull. First move, keep this obelisk purring like a mutated kitten, or a psychotic cat with an attitude problem, Snark piped in. Same difference. The alien fleet, having been thoroughly rattled by the obelisk's impromptu jamming session, was in a state of befuddled retreat. They looked like they'd been swatted with a cosmic fly swatter, and their retreat was the kind of strategic withdrawal usually reserved for overly ambitious bank robbers. Kezra's face softened just a shade, more of a charcoal gray than her usual iron-willed slate. I think they're finally backing off. Either that, or they've realized they left the oven on back home. Xylo allowed himself a tiny nod of satisfaction. Good. With any luck, they'll think twice before gate crashing our little party next time. Snark's holographic form twirled dramatically, and lo, the humans defied the odds once more. Let the galaxy bear witness to their improbable survival and questionable decision-making. Oh, give it a rest, Xylo said, rolling his eyes. You can't deny we've pulled off something miraculous here. Miraculous, Kezra echoed, raising an eyebrow. I'd call it a reckless feat of engineering desperation. Same thing, really, Snark offered. Miracle, desperation. They're two sides of the same coin. As if on cue, the cult of the circuit, that peculiar sect convinced the Thalnara was some divine relic, began to stir. They'd been watching the unfolding chaos with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious epiphanies or unexpected tax refunds. One of their number, a wiry man with eyes that glittered with the kind of fervor reserved for last-minute lottery winners, approached Xylo. "Truly you have been chosen," he declared, with all the sincerity of a door-to-door salesman pitching eternal salvation. "The obelisk has spoken through you." Xylo rubbed the back of his neck, momentarily unsure whether to be flattered or deeply concerned. "Yeah, well, it's amazing what you can achieve when you're up against the wall. Chosen by a cosmic doodad," Snark snarked. "Bet you didn't see that one coming." "Not in a million years," Xylo muttered, eyeing the cultist with cautious amusement. "The circuit has deemed you worthy," the cultist continued, oblivious to Xylo's dubious honor. "You have brought forth a holy disruption." "We shall sing of your deeds," Kezra coughed, a sound somewhere between disbelief and a suppressed laugh. "Just what we need. Our very own choir. Maybe they can sing us to sleep once this is all over," Xylo suggested, the sarcasm in his voice sharper than a laser scalpel. The cultist nodded, his enthusiasm undampened. "We must inform the others. This is a sign from the divine circuitry." "Great," Xylo said, waving him away. "Go share the good news. Maybe it'll help them forget we're still standing on a ticking time bomb." As the cultist scurried off, Kezra sighed, her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. "I swear, if I hear another word about divine circuits, I might just lose it." "Hey, look on the bright side," Xylo said, a grin tugging at his lips. "At least they're not chanting for our heads." Yet Snark added helpfully, "Give it time." The alien fleet's retreat was more of a haphazard scuttle at this point, their ships barely holding formation as they broke away, presumably to reevaluate their life choices, or lack thereof. "Well, we've bought ourselves some breathing room," Kezra said, tapping a few keys to stabilize the colony's systems. "What's next, O Chosen One? Survey the damage, patch what we can, and pray the next fleet has a softer touch," Xylo replied, running a hand through his hair. "And maybe figure out how to keep this place from falling apart at the seams." Snark projected a holographic thumbs up. "Sounds like a plan, or at least a loose collection of good intentions." Xylo chuckled, feeling a strange kinship with the snarky AI. "Better than nothing, right? Much better than nothing," Kezra agreed, crossing her arms and looking out at the stars. "And who knows, maybe this little miracle of yours will keep us alive a bit longer." Xylo watched the retreating alien ships, their lights twinkling like confused fireflies against the backdrop of space, or at least until the next crisis hits. "Ah, the sweet, comforting embrace of impending doom," Snark quipped. "Wouldn't feel like home without it." The trio lingered on the observation deck, each lost in their own thoughts, the obelisk standing silent and foreboding between them. For all its mysterious power, it was still just a tool, a wild card in a losing hand. "Well," Xylo said, clapping his hands together, "I suppose we should start figuring out what to do about the angry remnants of that fleet. Politely ask them to leave us alone," Kezra suggested, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or offer them an exclusive invitation to a one-way trip into a black hole," Snark offered, its voice as chipper as ever. "As much as I like the idea of forwarding their mail to a singularity, we might need something a bit more diplomatic," Xylo mused. "Diplomacy," Kezra said, raising an eyebrow. "Isn't that just war with extra paperwork?" "Pretty much," Xylo agreed. "But I'm hoping we can at least make them think twice before trying round two." "Hope springs eternal," Snark said, its holographic form giving an exaggerated shrug. "Or maybe just eternally naivety." "Either way," Xylo replied, "we've got a breather. Let's make the most of it." The obelisk's once threatening hum had turned into a gentle thrum, a reminder of their narrow escape and the power they'd wielded. It was a tool, a weapon, and a mystery, a lot like the universe itself. As Xylo, Kezra, and Snark watched the stars, the weight of their survival settled over them, a fragile victory in a galaxy determined to swallow them whole. But for now, they were still here, still fighting and still defying the odds. "Guess we'll have to keep winging it," Xylo said, his voice light despite the gravity of their situation. "Winging it is practically our middle name," Kezra replied, a grin breaking through her usual stoicism. "Better than abandoned ship," Snark quipped, "though I doubt our luck will hold out forever." "Maybe not forever," Xylo conceded. "But for now, let's just enjoy the chaos." And so they did, standing side by side, staring out at the universe with a mixture of defiance, humor, and a touch of madness, the quintessential human cocktail for survival in a cold, uncaring galaxy. "Here's to the next disaster," Xylo said, raising an imaginary toast. "And to surviving it," Kezra added, clinking her invisible glass against his. Snark joined in, its holographic fingers mimicking the gesture. to improbable victories and questionable alliances. Together, they faced the stars, ready for whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. After all, chaos was their specialty, and they were more than prepared to keep winging it. The observation deck had returned to its usual ambience, a dreary funeral with star maps instead of wreaths. Xylo sat back in his chair, watching the retreating specks of the alien fleet like a bored cat eyeing a fly that got away. The obelisk hummed a satisfied tune, as if it were a cosmic DJ who'd just finished spinning the perfect set. "Well, Xylo," Snark's voice piped up, smooth and sardonic as ever, "congratulations on not getting us all blown to space bits. I guess this means you're the colony's new hero." "Hope you like fan mail. Hero my ass," Xylo muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just relieved we didn't end up as stardust. Take the win where you can get it," Kezra said, her eyes still scanning the console like it might pull a fast one when no one was looking. "You managed to pull a rabbit out of a hat without the rabbit or the hat," Xylo snorted. "Yes, more like pulling despair out of the jaws of certain death. Not exactly a skill I wanted to hone." The cult of the circuit had taken up residence in the observation deck, buzzing around like flies at picnic. Their fervor had been turned up to 11 since the alien retreat, eyes alight with a zeal that screamed cult meeting at 5. One of them, that wiry man with the lottery winner eyes, approached Xylo again. "We have been blessed by your presence, chosen one," he said, his voice dripping with sincerity. "The obelisk, it has spoken through you." "Great," Xylo replied, deadpan. "Can it say something useful next time, like the secret to fixing our power reserves?" The man blinked, clearly unprepared for Xylo's lack of reverence. "Perhaps its wisdom is eternal, yet cryptic, like a fortune cookie that only predicts doom," Snark added. "Or maybe it just wants us to stop asking stupid questions." The cultist, not one to be deterred by sarcasm, continued, "Your actions have brought us together, united in this divine purpose." "Yay for unity," Xylo said, offering a half-hearted wave. "Maybe next time the divine purpose can come with a manual." Kezra, suppressing a grin, turned to Xylo. "So what's the plan, oh fearless leader? Survive?" Xylo suggested. "I'm still working out the details. Maybe we can convince the cultists to pitch in with repairs, divine intervention and all that." "Ah yes, nothing says holy mission like manual labor," Snark chimed in. "That ought to keep them busy." As the cultists dispersed, probably to spread the good word, or at least the version that didn't involve imminent death, Xylo found himself wondering just how the hell they'd managed to scrape through yet another disaster. He glanced at the obelisk, a towering enigma still pulsing with inexplicable power. It was ancient, and yet somehow wedged itself into their chaotic dance with destiny. "Like the universe's worst wedding crasher. Think this alliance will hold?" Kezra asked, leaning against the console, her usual pragmatism still intact. "If it doesn't, we just point them at the obelisk and let them sort it out," Xylo replied. "Let them argue over which button to push when we're long gone." "Optimistic," Snark said dryly. "Though I suppose when the alternatives are bleak, hope becomes the punchline." Xylo leaned back, folding his arms. "What can I say? We're good at winging it. Winging it is humanity's greatest invention," Kezra mused. "Right up there with fire and bad decisions." Speaking of bad decisions, Snark interrupted with perfect timing. "Did anyone consider what happens if our alien friends decide they want another round? That's what the obelisk is for," Xylo said, tapping the controls with feigned confidence. "We'll just keep the cosmic disco beats rolling." Kezra smirked. "You know, it's funny. We've somehow convinced a bunch of zealots that you're some kind of techno-messiah." Xylo raised an eyebrow. "I'm hoping that's not a job with a lot of responsibility. Right now, it mostly involves talking to a glorified rock," Snark said. "So you're probably safe." "Good," he replied. "I've got enough on my plate without adding profit to my resume." The collective mood shifted to something almost resembling optimism. The alien threat had retreated, however, temporarily, and the cultists seemed content to worship their new electronic deity. It was almost peaceful if you ignored the background hum of pending disaster. "Think the universe will give us a break?" Kezra asked, voice tinged with the kind of hope that only comes with exhaustion. Xylo shrugged. "Probably not. But we'll keep winging it until it does." They stood together, a mismatched trio facing the uncertain future with a shared determination. The obelisk might have been a mystery, but it was their mystery now, a symbol of survival in a galaxy that seemed hell-bent on kicking them while they were down. Xylo watched the retreating alien fleet, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Here's to surviving another day. Here's to surviving against the odds," Kezra replied, raising her imaginary glass once more. "And here's to the next disaster," Snark added, its holographic fingers raised in a mock toast. "May it be as entertaining as the last." With that, they turned back to the task at hand. The colony had survived, but there was work to be done, repairs to make, systems to stabilize, and a damn good drink to be had. "Let's get to it," Xylo said, clapping his hands together. We've got chaos to manage, and so they did, three unlikely heroes navigating the turbulent seas of space with nothing but grit, sarcasm, and a stubborn refusal to quit. In the end, that was all they needed. The colony might have been a ticking time bomb, but it was their ticking time bomb, and as long as they were standing, they'd keep defying the odds, one disaster at a time. Think we'll ever get a day off? Kezra asked as they set to work. Not until the universe decides to give up on us, Xylo replied. Snark's voice echoed with a laugh. And we all know that's not going to happen. With that, they got back to work, each with the same relentless determination and irreverent humor that had gotten them this far. Because in the end, that was the only way to survive in a galaxy that always seemed to want them dead.